Hey YouTube world. I've been getting into MBTI again lately, and I'm in ESP stuff. Uh, Basically, people representing the ESTP on YouTube. So I figured I'd kind of put my voice out there in quarantine. So it really sucks. But just when my wife and I were just like planning on going out and going on vacation, doing lots of things, hanging out with people. Nice, but it's been good because I've been getting to know my wife a lot better. She's an ISFJ, and so anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about this as I've really been delving into it. It's starting to make a lot more sense to me. I've been studying this stuff for years, but I never really fully had a full grasp of the cognitive functions. So first, uh, I guess late teens, early 20s, around that time, and so I started learning more about it over time. But at first, it was just Myers Briggs and then the cognitive functions. I was reading Jung a lot at that period of time. I was doing a lot of development myself, and I've had very interesting life development. So I'm not like the stereotype of the ESTP, though I very much have established that that is my type. Um, but I haven't really been super athletic or anything like that, and that's like kind of a stereotype of the ESTP. But I haven't gone to a whole lot of them, and even kind of the shows and stuff. I used to go more to like the shows, especially my punk rock days, um, and I love doing that. But as I do more of these videos, I'll plan on doing more of these videos. Um, and but anyway, I got into Kersey temperament theory later on because when I started getting back into personology or typology, um, because when I was trying to figure out the functions, it wasn't making sense, and there's a lot of confusion in the MBTI world, I think, and so it was very confusing sometimes. But also, I think I realized later on is I thought I was an intuitive type at the time, and I even I even thought I was an INFP for a while because I had an interesting basic development, and I was very spiritual atmosphere and everything. And Kersey notes that SPs can be very chameleon like, and so they kind of camouflage into their environment. So I did a lot of that, and I don't know. I hope that like see when I'm looking at the screen, I'm seeing my eyes like looking to the very right, but when I'm looking at the camera, if I look at the corner of my eye, it feels like I'm still looking sort of to the right. So I hope that my gaze looks looks like I'm trying to direct my focus to the audience, but this is the first time I'm doing this on my phone. Anyway, um, yeah, but there's a lot of things that didn't match up with INFP, and I was kind of like looking between different types, and so there's a lot of things in my psyche that, and I realized that I very much am an SP type. So there were things that, like, for instance, one of the first descriptions I read about the INFP is that they don't like theoretical sort of. It's gonna sound crazy, but and I asked this. I told this to someone who was very much into Kersey typology later on, but even in MBTI, I don't think this is actually a common thing to think about INFPs, which is strange that it was even in the description. But it was like they don't like hypothetical scenarios of what could have happened. And I was like, yeah, I hate it when people like say, well, you did such and such a thing, and this could have happened. I'm like, well, it didn't. Like, screw that. Like, but that's like more of an SP type of thing. Like that's because expert sensing is all about being engrossed in the moment and things that actually happened and not worrying about what could have happened. And what could happen is very much an extroverted intuition thing. So that's second on the stack for the INFP. So it's really weird that it was in the description. But there were certain things like that that I resonated with. And or also this keeps freezing sometimes. I hope it's not freezing. I hope that's not gonna. Anyway, uh, let's see what I was saying. Okay, so I think when people are developing like as a kid and into their teens, their personality is still kind of in flux, and so it's still being defined and all that. You know, your brain doesn't fully mature until you're like in your 20s or something like that. And I think I was kind of moody sometimes, and I still get moody sometimes, but it's really not as much. Um, uh, I actually, I started to become surprised later on. I became much colder and more unemotional. Um, anyway, so yeah, so that plus the fact that there were some bad descriptions out there and stuff, and I was a little more introverted. Like, I was like more unexpressive. But then in high school, I started realizing that um, uh, that I was sort of introvert trapped in the extrovert introvert shell, and I started to open up and become more outgoing during that period. So anyway, but yeah, now I can like literally. Okay, I wanted to say something real quick before I get into that type of temperament theory. It once I really started to conversate with, basically I know Dave Kersey Jr. He's the son of the author. I know him really well, and he's typed me as a promoter ESTP, and a bunch of other people who know me in real life say it makes sense for me, and I've always gotten that result for over a decade. And it makes total sense to me, especially since it more and really coming to grasp. Like it takes me a while sometimes. I study concept over and over again, and then finally, that you have that inferior introverted intuition. Finally, it kind of grasps a hold of the concept. Um, but and this is true. Even when I was a little kid, I remember. I know I'm like gunning bunny trails here, but anyway, when I was a little kid, I took things very literally. This Kirsty says about artisans too. They take things literally, and even metaphors. Like idealists tend to traffic in metaphors a lot, even as little kids. But artisans tend to just take things sort of at face value, and so I told you I was in a very spiritual environment and everything. But when I was like, and I was raised Pentecostal, so it's spiritual. When I was a little kid, and this was actually this guy was going out with my aunt at the time, but he was helping teach Sunday school, and I was like, let's see, I think this was I might have been 9 or something, but anyway, I remember he was like saying the Bible is like the bread of life, and so I was like, huh, that's interesting, because like I guess I can kind of see what you're saying, because like when I'm reading the Bible, sometimes it's like I'm doing this thing with my mouth. I'm like, smacking my lips or whatever, and like, yeah, it's kind of like I'm eating, and he just like gave me this blank stare, like you really did not get the metaphor right. Like that was his expression was just like, oh, this is gonna be really tough, you know. But it was just like stupid stuff like that, like I just it happened through writing poetry. I used to write poetry a whole lot, and I learned kind of that way to because because okay, here's another thing Kirsty says about artisans is that they use similes, like this was like that, like this and they'll use colorful similes that have a lot of impact in sort of like if you saw this in real life, like explosion. It was like an explosion, and using words like, and it was this kind of like this, or it was kind of like that. But idealists will use metaphors, like they'll say this thing is that, like this is, you know, this is the bread of life, that kind of thing. And so, gosh, there's not this thing. Sometimes I want to like collect my thoughts because I've gone so far off track. But oh yeah, okay. So I realized in writing poetry that you can't just use like a lot like that. You can't just keep saying like. It's like that, like. But it's easier just to be. It's more efficient to just use metaphor. And so I think I learned through that, the power of metaphors. But anyway, where was I going with all this? Okay, so Kirsty doesn't. does not have a great liking for the cognitive functions, because Kersey is very much rational, and his son are both very much rationals, and so they're very technically precise. And I think they're probably right that Jung was an INFJ, because he was precise, but INFJs can be pretty precise too. Like, I know a couple of INFJs, and I wanted to talk about them too. They can be very with how they communicate things, and so I think he was an INFJ. He used sort of metaphorical language, and because of the way he wrote about the functions, it was like kind of strange, like the direction of the libido, whether it's extroverted or introverted functions, and he categorized the functions according to extroversion or introversion. Like, that was the major category split. And for Kersey, the major category split is abstract versus sensory. So anyway, I got really into Kersey typology, and then I kind of accepted that because I realized, because like, okay, so basically years before, you know, before I kind of walked away from typology for a little bit, I was really trying to understand the cognitive functions. It wasn't making much sense, because I was trying to create my own test based on basically I was trying to ground the functions in a way that would make sense. So make a test that's like, when you're watching a movie, how do you react? Do you think about, do you just get sucked into the story? Do you get sucked into the emotions? Do you think about, like, and stuff, and how this is actually just a movie? You're not this isn't a real story. Or do you get sucked into the story as a story? These characters, kind of, like, this difference between someone who thinks like, well, that character's really crazy, and I just can't believe he did that, and then someone else will be like, well, I can't believe the writers wrote a character like that, because that's totally unrealistic. Different people will react different ways. And so I was trying to do that for the different functions, and it just wasn't making much sense. I think that's partially because there's a lot of confusing information out there, and I think it's partially because I don't like lean more on the side of being abstract. And so anyway, but I didn't really learn that until later on. So within Kersey typology, first of all, I was taking a test and I was getting ESTP. So I liked the descriptions, and they made a lot of sense to me, because they're colorful descriptions that sounded like real people. So I was like, I'm kind of interested in this. I wanted to join the forum. And so that's when I got to know Dave, and I'm friends with a lot of them to this day. Others I'm not, but it's a long story. Anyway, yeah, anyway, so what was I saying with that? Okay, so Kersey does not really give a lot of weight to the functions, because he thought that were just too much gibberish and stuff. And also the temperaments, like even Myers and Briggs, I think it was Myers, who in the different temperaments that Kersey later adopted. And some talk about how, like, I know Gage Brown, I was talking with him on the ESTP group, I was talking about how it doesn't make much sense to classify ENTPs and INTPs with ENTJs and INTJs, because they have totally different function set in their ego, their consciousness. And same with, the NFs altogether. But Myers actually did that before, and Kersey was tracking on temperaments before he looked at Myers' stuff. He used temperaments throughout history. And so, yeah, he found a lot of correlations. And, the way he kind of correlates them all, it does make a lot of sense. All the way from Hippocrates through Plato to, there's this guy named Paracelsus. I don't know much about him in medieval era. And then there's a lot of people in the 20th century. And there were others. But it makes sense, because there is a lot of correlation between those temperaments. And I also think there's something to the functions, because if you define them objectively, and C.S. Joseph is pretty good about this, if you define them sort of objectively, you can actually see those different ways of approaching life in the different types. So, for instance, like, hi, I'm going to stop this and start a new video later.